Hi folks, in this video I'll be showing you how I painted up this Mystique statue which has been sculpted by Wicked 3D.
Okay, as you can see, here are all the printed parts of the model. Now I have printed this in 1/8 scale. The model comes preset at 1/6 scale, so I obviously have reduced the size of all the pieces. Now, I was printing away and I was printing them the individual pieces because obviously it's always easier to print out pieces individually and paint them up individually if you can, and then glue them in together later. So that was my plan, but I kind of had to change my mind on this one. As you can see, there's a couple of points where the parts join and there are kind of little bits of gaps. They're not the biggest gaps in the world. I probably could have sorted them out, but what it would have meant is in order to sort of sort these gaps out, I would have had to have glued the pieces together and then started filling in the gaps. So I would have ended up with a complete model anyway. That arm isn't too bad, but this one, there was quite a big gap here where that arm attaches. So yeah, it wasn't perfect. So in the end, I decided, right, let's scrap that idea, and I will just print the top half and the bottom half as one piece, because you have that option, thankfully, with the file. So this is what I've done. So yes, it's going to be more difficult to paint because it's now a one piece, but at least I haven't got any gaps to worry about. Okay, the other thing is this statue comes with a ton of options. I think there's 3 different heads you can print. You can choose 2 different, actually no, I think it's like three or possibly even 4 different torsos you can print, because you can have where both arms are up holding guns, one arm has got Wolverine claws. Yeah, there's a whole heck of a lot of different options, but this is the option I went for. Now I was going to print off, well I did in fact print off two of the 3 heads, and I was going to have it so that I could swap the heads around, but to be honest, once you stick the head on, this isn't actually glued, so I won't be able to take it off, but you can see it doesn't come off particularly easily. You could probably sand it off and make it a bit easier to take off, but I think the thing is, the truth of the matter is, that because I've printed at 1/8 scale, it's quite small, the neck joint, so trying to sort of fit magnets in there just probably isn't worth it. So to be honest, although I have printed out a second head, I'm not going to use this one. I'm just going to go with this version. So I have printed, so basically the top, apart from the head, is all one piece, and then the bottom half is all one piece as well. So again, she'll just join here at the waist, and then she's got a belt of various skulls that go in around there. So the other option you have is on bases. So you have a sort of a much more complicated base with like candles and whatnot, or a more simplified one, which is the way I've gone. I don't like bases that are too too detailed really and take away from the model. So I'll just very quickly put her together. And here she is, obviously minus the belts, but you can see it's a very nice model. So again, even though I printed the 2 pieces together, I think I'm actually going to have to glue those together as well, because just rotating around the model to see, figure out where your gaps are. Although you've got quite a big sort of gap on the belt on the back here, actually when you put the skull belt onto it, it actually does cover that up pretty well, so that's good. The only issue I've got though is just here around the hip, so where that meets the dress, there's obviously quite a big gap there, so I'm going to have to fill that in with a bit of resin. So reluctantly, I think I'm going to have to glue the torso to the legs, which means I'm going to have to essentially be painting the model altogether minus the head and the belt. So it's going to be a little bit trickier, but it just means it'll look so much better at the end product. Okay, so enough of me preambling and waffling on. I'm going to go off and sand the model down to get rid of any little marks on it left over from the printing. I'm then going to prime the body in grey, and I'm going to prime the base in silver. After spraying the base with lead belcher silver, I'm now just going to paint in a few of the details just to break that up using a bit of Balthasar gold. And now I'm just picking out a few more details, this time using some gold Retributor armour. And then finally I'm going to take a little bit of black and just work this into some of the recesses. I'm going to apply an all over black wash to the base. Now to do this I've literally just dropped a touch of black paint and then mixed in loads of water. So it's really watery. Of course you could just use a black wash if you've got one in hand, something like Nuln Oil, but because this piece is quite big I'm going to just make up my own. So I'm just going to basically throw this across everything, make sure it gets into all the little nooks and crannies and cover absolutely all the stuff we've just painted, and it'll leave it looking a little bit worn and battered. So we'll take a little while to dry. Now that wash has had time to dry, you can see it's kind of darkened down the whole model, dirtied it up a little bit. And you can also go and do a little bit of panel liner as well if you felt like it, if you just needed to darken down any other recesses. So what I'm going to do now is try and make it look a little bit more comic style. I'm actually going to take some metallic blue and I'm going to do a dry brush off this across the whole of the metal. So get most of the paint off the brush, and then I'm just going to start going across the whole model, trying to catch as much as I can off the areas. Try not to go too heavy, and will just give a sort of a slight metallic blue to the whole thing, which is, as I say, just gives it a slight more interest and a little bit more comic booky feel. So I'm going to repeat that process now, doing a dry brush using some royal purple, which is a metallic purple. Okay, so with that purple and that blue, it's given it a nice metallic shine. So what I'm going to do now is just finish it off with a little bit of panel liner, and I'm just going to essentially just run this back over some of the parts I want to just darken down a little bit, so just in some of the recesses, and just to bring out some of the details. You can be pretty sloppy with this stuff, really and truly, but it does take a little while to dry because it is an oil. Now I have glued the two sections of the body, top to bottom, and I've also filled in the gap there around the side. Now those of you who are good with colour will realise that despite what I said, I've actually sprayed this white, I haven't sprayed it grey. So I primed it grey initially, but then on a second thought, I thought there's so much white of the costume, in fact the entire costume is white, it'd make much more sense just to spray it white. White's obviously a very difficult colour to paint. So I have sprayed it with White Scar by Citadel. Now the beauty of that is Citadel also do a pot of paint of the same white colour. You might think all whites are the same, but trust me, they're not. So the good thing is with this is I can touch this up with the actual smaller pot of paint to go along with it. So the first thing I'm going to paint is the skin, and for that I'm going to use some Macragge Blue. Now I'm going to try and be as neat as possible and try to avoid hitting the white of the clothing. But inevitably I'm probably going to hit it, but it doesn't matter because, as I say, I can then always tidy that up with some White Scar pot paint if needs be. Here is the model after 2 thin coats of that Macragge Blue has been applied. So it's quite dark at this point, and I want to lighten it up from here. So obviously I want to keep the darkness in the recesses and brighten up the higher raised areas. So to do that I'm going to do another dry brush. This time I'm going to use some Calgar Blue, which just happens to be kind of the next colour blue up from where I was. That being said, I did add original part of that darker blue in with the mix just to give me a slightly closer colour to that original colour, because you want to sort of bring up the resolution, but you don't want to do it too much. Because if you get too much of a quick transition, it just won't look right. So I'll tell you what, let me grab the head, and I think it's probably easier to show you on this one. So as with all dry brushes, make sure you got most of the paint off, and then just start liberally applying over all the raised areas. Just bring it up nice and gently. So just quickly comparing the completed head against the body, which I haven't yet done, you can see the lighter colour on the head, and that's kind of the look I'm going for. So I've got to make sure I match that now on the body. Now I'm going to do a second dry brush over the skin just to bring that colour up a little bit more. So what I've done is I've mixed a little bit of Thousand Suns blue, which is kind of a turquoise colour, and I've mixed that with sort of 50-50 with that Calgar blue. You can see the colour on my palette here. This is the colour I've done, and you can also see the transition actually from the original blue up to lighter to this third dry brush. So this one is going to be quite bright compared to what we've just done. But again, it's just a case of going all over the model, focusing much more on the raised areas, and just bringing that tone up a little bit more. Now, Mystique skin is different colour depending on whichever artist decided to colour it. If you look at any sort of reference online, she goes from very dark blue up to a very bright turquoise. So it's really up to you what shade you want to do. And after that third dry brush, this is the tones of the skin that I'm left with, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to leave the skin tones as they are. Next, I'm going to carry on working on the face, and for this I'm going to use some burgundy, and I'm going to paint in the lips, and I'm also going to use the same colour for the fingernails on the main body. Next up is some black just to work in around the eyes. Next up is some deck tan. Now this is for the white of the eyes, but later on I am going to go over that and turn them yellow. Next up, I have taken some Uriel yellow and I have added in a little bit of that deck tan just to thicken up the yellow a little bit, because it is a very thin paint. Now this is again going to go back into the eyes, and this is now just to turn them yellow from white. Finally, to finish off the eyes, I'm going to run a shade of Cassandra yellow into each eye. I'm now using some Retributor Armor Gold to paint in this skull on her forehead and also on her earring. Next is a black wash over those gold parts. I'm using Nuln Oil. After that wash has dried, I'm now going to come back with a light dry brush using that original gold. This will just brighten the skulls up just a little bit, whilst keeping the darkness in the recesses. And I'm doing the exact same process on the skulls for the belt. I'm going to take some corn red next, and this is for the hair and the eyebrows. Now this is the last thing to finish on the face. For the eyebrows, I like to do short, sharp strokes. Just gives it a little bit more natural look. Next up is a black wash using Nuln Oil and covering the entire hair to give it a bit of depth. Now that wash has had time to dry, I'm just going to do an all over dry brush using that original corn red. Now for the gun and the holsters and also the belts going across, I'm just going to paint this flat black. Next I'm going to take some neutral grey and I'm going to do a dry brush across all of those black straps and also the holsters. Finally then, to finish off the holsters, is just using a bit of gunmetal silver to paint in all the clasps. Using some torn up little bit of sponge and some silver paint, I'm now just going to dab on a little bit of scuffs and damage to the gun. Now, the final part of the model to do is the white part of the costume. Now, I want to break this white up a little bit, so where the areas are sort of a bit textured on the side here and on the back of the boots, I'm going to do that a different colour. And the colour I'm going to use is an off-white deck tan. Now, the last thing that needs to be done is some shading across the white of the costume, so for that I'm going to use some grey soft pastel. Now, once you've made enough pastel shadings, you just need to get yourself a brush and sort of rub a little bit of that into the bristles. Now, I'm using a flat brush here because I think that's going to help me with the type of creases that I want to work on. So, for example, she's got these creases along the back of the boots here, so I'm just going to work some of this into those folds. And this will just create a bit of shadow. Okay, so I think with that last little bit of shadowing done, I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I've gone around the model and filled in sort of all the creases, just added a bit more depth. So I'm going to glue all the parts together now, and I'm going to return and show you the finished completed model.
So I think I'm going to leave the video there. Thank you ever so much for watching. If you like this type of content, then please consider liking and subscribing, and I will see you soon. Take care, everyone.